This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is Francisco Gonzalez. He's an author. He's the host of the Agents of Innovation podcast. He's the executive director of the Economic Club of Miami. He's a tour leader, visiting professor at a university in Guatemala. Lots of stuff going on. Born and raised in South Florida. Francisco, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Vance, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoy your tweets all day long and every day, and a lot of the other people you've had on the podcast. So it's exciting to be on here.
Yeah, we've had some overlap, right, in terms of podcast guests?
Yeah, so I had James Nuveen on my podcast, I think just before you did, and James and I actually met in South Florida on one of his visits. I missed him on our recent visit to Medellin, Colombia, because he was out of the country, but I also had the chance to meet with Jers, who you just had on, a fantastic episode.
Oh, nice.
And our Fearless Journeys group trip to Medellin, actually, we had dinner with Jers and his girlfriend, and it was a really enlightening conversation, and I was glad to see that your listeners got to hear from him as well.
Yeah, Twitter loves Jers. Tell me what you guys talk about.
Well, I think a lot of people that come on my group trips, they're the kind of people that, really are interested in travel and seeing new parts of the world. And I think a number of them have, visited plenty of other countries for long enough periods that, there's definitely some interest in people potentially, moving somewhere, right? And so whether it's Colombia or somewhere else, and also obviously everybody wants to save money on their taxes, and they want to, they also want to protect their money maybe for all sorts of reasons. So I think Jers was able to give us all a lot of insights into what it's like living abroad in Latin America specifically, also Europe, and different ways we can, basically, use the different tax systems, the different banking systems, the different countries for our own personal benefit as well.
Interesting. And for the audience, we're talking about a previous podcast guest named Jers, aka The Way of Jers, Jerz, on Twitter. And also, if you look at our previous roll of podcasts, you guys can check out the Jers one, the James Nuveen one. I felt like we had more overlap than that as well on podcast guests, or am I wrong?
Well, I don't remember. I mean, I've had probably about 14 episodes of guests here in Guatemala, where I'm currently at the moment doing this podcast from. So, someone you should get on if you haven't, Francisco, that's my name. Fernando Pontaza. He's the co-founder of the first venture capital fund in Guatemala called Invariantes. He gets around himself as well. So, he's been on a local television program here recently. And he would be great. Now he is native born Guatemalan, but I think every single one of my guests I had in Guatemala were native born Guatemalans. So it's cool. Really interesting to see the entrepreneurship that's happening here.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I must have heard about this guy either from you, and I think there might be some overlap with another podcast called Lavando Capital podcast, something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. Yes, I think you're right.
You know that Lavando guy? I listened to a couple of episodes of his thing. Anyway, this is a little bit rambly for the start of the episode. Francisco, you know what? I would love for you to tell me more about kind of your experience on Twitter, on X. That's where we first got connected. Maybe you could, tell me what you like about My Latin Life and what drew you to this idea of Americans living abroad and Americans discovering Latin America, and my semi-controversial nature of tweeting.
Yeah, well, I love it. I got on Twitter, I think back around 2009 for the first time. And I thought it was, I think Twitter, now X, has always been super interesting because you could really connect with so many different kinds of people. Sometimes they might reply back. I think Instagram serves a little bit of that purpose now, but really Twitter/X is now, it's a little more intellectual, right? And so not just pictures and everything. So, but I think as I stopped following a lot of different accounts, say, I used to follow a lot more political accounts. I have a lot of friends as well in the political process. I worked for 3 different nonprofits that were focused on public policy. And, I just see a lot of kind of back and forth all day on politics, and you can very easily get sucked right into that. So I also just started following a lot of entrepreneurs on X, and then I started following a lot more people in Latin America, people that I found some interest in. James Nuveen, Jers, Gabby Global Spanish, all sorts of interesting characters out there. And I think maybe probably through some of their accounts, I came across my Latin Life, right? So, and you are so informational. I mean, my Latin Life Twitter account, I mean, I'm sure most people that are listening to this already, I hope are already following you, but it's so informational, and just all the comparisons you do between different countries, between the States, between Europe. And also, honestly, I feel like I'm very well informed about Latin America, and yet you introduced me to so many new places I've never heard of, especially a lot of smaller cities in Mexico. And I think I saw something the other day, in Paraguay, or something, and just all these different interesting things, and including how you can get citizenship and residency and all these sorts of things. So I love your Twitter account; it's great, and it seems like we follow a lot of the same great people as well. So there's like this little community that like maybe is being formed, like maybe it's through my Latin Life podcast or through my Latin Life, Twitter account, of all these different people, a lot of expats, especially, living in Latin America. And also I just love the fact that I think Latin America in some ways, it's almost like this open secret. Like it's right here in our backyard. If you live in the United States, like Latin America is literally right there. And instead of just going to like Cancun and Cozumel and some of the, kind of dumpy cruise ports that are around the Caribbean, you could really go a little deeper and really find some really great culture, opportunities to. And also, by the way, most of Latin America, right, is one language, Spanish. Obviously, got a huge country that speaks Portuguese, Brazil. So not that difficult to just get plugged in. Whereas Europe, you got to learn a lot of different languages to go around Europe. Obviously, it seems like everybody in the world speaks English these days. But I think getting out of the big cities and starting to go into some middle-sized or smaller cities really can help you on the Espanol.
Definitely. And that's part of your goal in Guatemala, right? You're sharpening up your Spanish there. And my understanding, I've never done this personally, but I've heard for years that Guatemala and Antigua in particular is like the hot spot for learning Spanish.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm here. So you probably, if for people listening, they might be confused. What Francisco Gonzalez isn't fluent in Spanish? I'm not. My dad was born in Cuba. He came to the U.S. when he was 7 years old. My mom is not Hispanic, so there wasn't really dialogue, between parents in the household growing up. My dad did try to teach us Spanish, but we're like, Dad, this is America. Like, speak English. My dad was fluent in English and Spanish. Just one of those things, one of those added values he was trying to give us and pass on. And also, my grandparents on his side, they spoke almost no English their entire life. So I minored in Spanish, and my Spanish has kind of been up and down over the years. But the last couple of years, being able to live in Guatemala for a year, I was fortunate to be at a university, Francisco Mariquin University, which is a free market university in Guatemala City. It's been around for over 50 years, and all the students there have to be proficient in English as well as their native Spanish. So I'm able to teach my classes there in English, which is great because I teach classes on entrepreneurship and innovation, and it's be very difficult to teach those complicated subjects in a language that I'm not 100% familiar with. But spending so much time in Latin America between living in Guatemala and leading some group trips in Colombia and Argentina and Uruguay and other places, my conversational Spanish has actually gotten much better. But I've noticed my grammar isn't as I need to really tighten up the grammar, and being able to I've been doing one-on-one instruction every day. Today was day 3 of a 2-week process of intensive Spanish instruction. So 4 hours a day for 2 weeks with a one-on-one instructor. So it's been really great. But yes, they have a number of Spanish schools here in Antigua, which, by the way, I think Antigua, to be honest with you, might be like the best city in Latin America, like to visit at least.
Not even on the Spanish front, just the town itself.
Yeah, just the town itself. I mean, it. First of all, I mean, I almost don't want to give the secret out, even though I know the secret's out.
No,
But
that's what we're here for, is the hidden
yeah,
gems.
yeah. I mean, it's a very small, relatively small city. The entire city is walkable, and I mean, once you get dropped off at Antigua, if you're just staying in Antigua, there's no need for a car. You could walk the entire city. If you really need to take a cab or a tuk-tuk to get just a little bit outside of it, you can. But it's a city that was founded by the Spanish in the late 1500s, and they were here until about 1773. And after several major earthquakes, including the one in 1773, the Spanish just said, like, we give up. We're moving. We're having a forced abandonment of the city, and they went 50 miles away, and they found a Guatemala City. Mm. But over the next century, there was basically nobody in Antigua. This entire place just was in ruins, but beautiful ruins, and you could still see all the ruins all the way around. But then, late 19th century, all the way to the current time, people have gone in and restored some of the buildings, and you walk by these buildings outside, and you have no idea what's on the other side of the wall. Like, it could be anything. It could be a gym, it could be a classroom, it could be a house, it could be a courtyard. You just have no idea. Yeah. And so it's amazing, and it's just really, really beautiful city. Also, there's actually quite a number of expats that have made their homes here over the numbers of years. So it's a very cosmopolitan city in terms of, I can go to Belgian restaurant here. I can go to a French restaurant, German restaurant, Italian restaurant, like people that moved from those countries that established themselves here. And there's a growing expat community, especially with some retirees that have come here. And this is a great place. The temperature in Antigua year round is in like the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. It might get into the 80s during some warmer parts of the days or warmer parts of the year, and it might get into like the low 50s, maybe certain times at night. But honestly, they call this area the eternal spring, and it's just perfect. Between about May and October, you get the rainy season, so it'll rain in the afternoons and evenings. But honestly, I'll take the rain in exchange for the beautiful temperatures. Compared to Florida in the summer. I love Florida, but Florida is hot, humid, sticky in the summer. We get rain anyway, so you might as well go down to Guatemala in the summer and get the nice cool temperatures. So Guatemala City, which is about an hour to 2 hours away, depending on traffic, from Antigua, as well as about 2 hours to the other side of Antigua is Lake Atitlan. They're all in the eternal spring zone.
Yeah, so it's the elevation, because I'm Googling it right now. So Antigua and Guatemala City are both at 1,500 meters, which would be in feet is, I don't know, 4,500, something like
close
that.
Close to 5,000.
Close to 5,000 feet, which is
almost like Denver.
Because but it feels different in like a more jungly environment. And that's like the coffee range, is you want to be between, I think it's 12 or 1,300 and 2,000 meters in order to grow high elevation coffee. So you're smack within that range. It's similar to a lot of Colombia, things like that. And yeah, arguably one of the best climate zones that you can have, other than, I would say, maybe Mediterranean climate is probably number one in terms of most agreeable climate. And then number two has got to be high elevation Latin America.
Yeah. I don't know how the Mediterranean does in the winter. Is it pretty similar all year long there?
It drops. It depends where you are, right? But
yeah,
I think.
I mean, basically here in Guatemala, in this region, the temperatures are pretty much the same all year. I mean, it's just, you don't need air conditioning here. I mean, it's just, you open the windows and it's. I'm actually in a house right now that has a courtyard in the middle, in the interior, and there's no roof. There's no opening. It's
Yeah,
just an
like a
open
fountain.
courtyard. Yeah, and so like when you a lot of these homes here, like there's walls around the exterior walls of the home, but on the interior, it's an open courtyard. It's a kind of I guess kind of a Spanish style.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
with the pillars, and it's like indoor,
Yes.
outdoor. You got the pillars, and then you have like a central square courtyard thing. Maybe you got a fountain in the middle
Right.
sometimes. That's the vibe, man. That's the vibe, like Spanish colonial. That's the vibe.
Yeah, so it's amazing place, and like I said, I mean, there's you could just keep. I have been to Antigua so many times in the last couple of years. I spent a lot of time here, and I just keep discovering new things in such a small place, right? And if you want to go a little bit more outside, you can go a little bit more outside. And then, of course, Guatemala City. A lot of people miss Guatemala City, but it's a big modern city, like many other places. It's got its good parts, it's got its challenging parts, like any other city. But I have found if you want to be in a big modern city with that's very inexpensive for people coming from, say, the U.S. You want to have all the amenities. You want to have amazing shopping malls and really some high end grocery stores. Um, high end other kinds of stores. Guatemala City is a great place. That's where I live when I'm
Hmm.
teaching at the University of Francisco Marroquin. And I would say, the city is divided into many different zones, like a lot of Latin American cities. Zone 10, Zone 4, Zone 15, probably the best, 3 or 4, maybe Zone 16. Probably the best like 4 zones to kind of live in
Hmm.
Guatemala City. But there's also Zone 14, Zone 13, some great spots there too, obviously. So you again, by the way, the one thing I'm going to say about Guatemala. So in addition to Guatemala City and Antigua, obviously you have, I think, if not the most beautiful lake in the world, one of the top 3 or 4, and that's Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. It is huge. It is the deepest lake in Central America. It's something like 1,500 feet deep. It's like something ridiculous. About 8 or 10 little small villages around it. Each has their own like ethnic makeup of different kind of Mayan ethnicities,
Hmm.
different people that make up those towns. And you get around the lake by boat. So once you get to the lake, you arrive pretty much at Panajachel. Anyway, I don't know. Every time I'm at Lake Atitlan, I'm just like, man, I don't know why more people don't come here. And I'm a little like, I'm not sure if I should be telling the world this on a podcast because I kind of wanted to keep it a little bit of a secret, but it's absolutely stunning. And honestly, I've had people come there. One of my travelers, my
Hmm.
friend Kevin, who came on one of our group trips, we were at probably the nicest spot for a sunset at Lake Atitlan.
Hmm.
And as we're watching the sunset, he looked at me and he said, Francisco, a few years ago, I was at Lake Como for like 2 weeks. He goes, there's no spot at Lake Como that's as beautiful as this. And that was Lake Atitlan in Guatemala is what he was talking about.
And what's the
So
spot? What's the name of the spot? I'm Google
the
Mapsing it
spot
right now.
is the spot is at Casa Palopo, which is a little boutique hotel, which is pretty expensive to stay at, and they don't have that many rooms, but they do have a restaurant there, and you've got to reserve the restaurant in advance. It's a small restaurant,
Hmm.
and so you just yeah, that's so on my last 2 group trips here, we had that restaurant reserved, and we typically tend to go there in the middle of the week where there's less people.
Got it.
On weekends, that place might have
Okay.
weddings and things going
Got
on.
it. Got it. Got it. So it's kind of the east side. So you're looking west, get the sunset.
Yes.
Okay. I see a
And you're
spot
elevated
called.
just enough to kind of look down a little bit. Because the great thing about Lake Atitlan, I should mention, it's got about 5 or 6 volcanoes around that surround it. In fact, the lake itself was formed, you know, I want to say like 80,000 years ago. I mean, I might be getting that wrong, but a long time ago, maybe even longer than that, by a volcano that basically you know was over, right? It was like the caldera, whatever you call it, when a
Sure.
volcano collapses or whatever, and that ended up becoming a lake, and then all the other volcanoes were formed around it over the many tens of thousands of years. Um, so it's a beautiful place, but there's Tikal up in the north, not the eternal spring up there. It's a little muggier. It's jungle. You
Hmm.
you take about a 45-minute flight from Guatemala City, or try to make a 10 or 12 hour drive out of it, which I don't recommend.
Mm-hmm.
But 45-minute flight from Guatemala City to Petén, and then you get a little like hour shuttle ride to Tikal.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the largest excavated Mayan ruins in the world, or I mean, I guess it's just this side of the world, but so it's Tikal is just amazing. I mean, I'm sorry I have to do this because I grew up in Florida, but when I was there, I told one of my friends, I said, "Man, this is like the Disney World of Mayan ruins." It's just like it was just like it's all here,
Perfect.
and
Mm-hmm.
so those are some great spots. But the one thing I want to say about Guatemala is every time I come here, it's like you learn about some new thing that you didn't even know existed, and then you're like, oh wow, there's another adventure waiting around the corner. So there's a lot of places I'd like to go that I still haven't been to in Guatemala, including Samuk Champey, just a place that's difficult to get to. You don't have any airport nearby. It's a 7 or 8 hour drive. Guatemala, probably one of the challenging things for the country here is they probably need better roads, especially getting around the country. I mean, one of the challenges is there's mountains and volcanoes and things
I
like
heard, I
that
heard
to
it's
get.
like the worst roads in Latin America.
It's not great. They're not great, and they're just also they're very clogged, right? They're very clogged because it's one of the challenges, by the way, that maybe we could talk a little bit about this, and I'd love to hear what some of your listeners might think, maybe if they tweet or something about this. But it seems like everywhere I go in Latin America, all the especially the bigger cities, Guatemala City, Bogota, Medellin, Buenos Aires, like all these places, traffic is like insane. It's just insane, and I don't like to drive at all. I don't like to be in traffic, so I like what Jers was saying. Find a city, find a spot in a city where you can just walk around.
Yep.
But I think part of the challenge here is that in a lot of these places in Latin America, it's been very, very recent that the economies have improved enough for enough people to start owning cars and motorcycles and things like that. And all of us, like they told me that 20, 25 years ago, the roads in Guatemala were empty because not that many people owned cars. They just couldn't afford to. Now, part of the success of Guatemala is that more and more people own their own private transportation, whether it's cars, motorcycles, what have you. And so these roads were not made for that many people, and they haven't been able to keep up as fast as people are getting on the road. And so
Mm.
that's what I think part of the challenge here is. And I suspect that might be part of the challenge in other parts of Latin America as well. Obviously, Mexico City, right? Insane traffic. Um, so um, anyway, so I don't know. I love to know what people might think about that, or what you might think about the situation there with so much traffic in some of these big cities.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by Language Blend, the new best way to learn Spanish. Language Blend focuses on what you actually need to live and get by abroad with daily one-on-one lessons, a dedicated texting partner. It's like living in a Spanish-speaking country without ever leaving home. Go to languageblend.com for more information. Yeah, a lot of it just predates cars. The U.S. was kind of built after cars, and a lot of it, where a lot of Latin America predates cars. A lot of
Yeah,
Latin America is older than the U.S. So,
right. Maybe that's probably it as well.
in at the university there in Guatemala, what do you teach?
I teach classes on entrepreneurship and innovation. So
And you teach in English.
I teach in English, yes.
And
And
is
the
how does
university
that
there's
work?
been well the students there are all fluent in English. It's You'd be really surprised. I mean, this is a school of almost 3,000 students. They have a law school, they have a medical school, they have a dental school, they have a culinary school. Every student there, though, ever since the school was founded about 51, 52 years ago, no matter what they're studying, they have to take 4 classes on the foundation of economics. And so part of that, I believe, was the mission of the school early on in the early 70s was, the founders was, how are we going to help be part of turning this country around? This is a country that was in the middle of a civil war at the time between the 1960s and 1990s.
Mm.
That war was in the shadows of the Cold War as well. So you have on one side, the guerrillas being funded by the leftists that are funded by Castro and things like that, and on the other side you have the CIA trying to help the government, and keep back the guerrillas, to keep back communism from spreading in another Latin American country. So there were not there were bad actors on all sides. Let's just put it that way. So, but I do think that this university came about in that setting and with the mission of, we really have to help the way that we're going to help this university. I would say 90% of the students that go there, they come from very wealthy elite backgrounds,
Okay.
but they give a lot of scholarships as well to people who cannot afford to go there, and most of them come from indigenous backgrounds and don't live in Guatemala, weren't born and raised in Guatemala City. So they also need some funding for some housing and things like that. So, and those are actually the brightest students at the school. I mean, I'm just really impressed by the caliber of the students at this school, but also their focus on really building an entrepreneur mindset for everybody, no matter what area they're going into. So anyway, part of this school preparing these students for the real world and to be on top of their game as they come out is that they have to be fluent in English. And most of them, like I said, the 90% or so, have probably gone to private schools, K through 12. Most of them are actually already coming in knowing English as well. So, which is, by the way, a challenge for me in learning Spanish, because obviously I have to, I'm teaching them in English, and then when I'm having conversations all over the campus with these students and other professors, I'm mostly having conversations in English, because I know they know English, and I'm going to be lazy. So anyway, but it's a fantastic university, and it's really become well known all over the world. They now opened a campus in Madrid, and they also
Oh,
have
cool.
I believe it's an MBA program in Panama.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So legit university.
Yeah, if they, I mentioned to somebody at the university after I visited Argentina for the first time this year, and really seeing firsthand the total economic disaster that Argentina is right now. I said, "Gosh, this country needs a Francisco Marroquin University, and if you guys want to go down there, and I'll help you open it." So,
How do you spell the Medellin? Just for the
Marroquin is
audience?
Marroquin, Francisco Marroquin. It's like Marroquin University. Um, you might be asking, who is Francisco Marroquin? First of all, the university is not a religious school. It's not, but it's named after the first. I believe he was the first archbishop to Guatemala, and
Mm-hmm.
so when they were, but the biggest thing about him, this is somebody who was an archbishop, hundreds of years ago, is that he had a real classical liberal education with a real foundation in the idea of like a free market, like more of a for kind of a free market economics. I mean, hundreds of years. So they wanted to say, hey, we got this person who is part of the beginning of like this area of the world, Guatemala, when the Spanish came, the beginning when the Spanish came, and why not use his name to remind Guatemalans that we actually have this great past, and that we have these great leaders that were talking about the ideas that we think are some of the best ideas of the world, really modeled on what they saw the success of the economy of the United States with a prosperous economy built on
I like that.
liberty and free markets.
Yeah, I like that. So I have a question for you. Myself, I think it'd be cool for me to become a adjunct professor one day, something like that. How does one go about becoming a part-time professor? How'd you get your role?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of things in life are one of the biggest things I can just convey to people is, you always want to be building relationships. You just never know where things are going to take you. Um, and I always just look at this as an interesting lesson because I got to know several people over the many years that have been in some ways involved with this university that live in the U.S. Some as donors and supporters, others who have gone down there and been visiting professors themselves. I really didn't know much about the university other than I just heard there was this like free market university in Guatemala. So in 2019, I made my first ever visit to Guatemala. And that was mostly because my friend Kyle, who lives in Colorado, and he had left his job in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to go down to Antigua, actually, and learn Spanish, just like I'm doing it at this moment, right? And so he told me he was going to be spending about 6 to 9 months in Guatemala. I said, really? I said, at that point, I had actually never been to Central America at all. So I literally just came down here for a long weekend, like a Thursday through Sunday. And we did so much. We hiked a volcano and all that. But I also knew about this university in Guatemala City. And I reached out to a friend of mine, my friend Rodolfo, who's in Miami. I said, hey, is there any way you could connect? Like, I could take a tour of that university, down in Guatemala. I just always heard about it. I didn't expect anything more than that. Like, can I just show up and like, whatever. So I get there. Well, before I get there, I should say the next day, Rodolfo was like, yeah, sure. And he emails the president of the university at the time and introduced me to that person over email. And the person said, hey, yeah, you're here. Why don't you? Can you be here at 7:30 a.m. on Friday? During your visit. I said sure. So my friend Kyle and I went, and we met them, and we met a couple of the top people at the university. And while they were, they met with us, and then they gave us a tour. And while they were giving us a tour, one of them said to us, "Hey, you guys have pretty interesting backgrounds. If you're ever interested in teaching a class here as a visiting professor, let us know. We'd be open to having you maybe teach a class." Honestly, when he said that, it kind of went right over my head because it was literally my first morning in Guatemala ever. I didn't think I'd ever be living in Guatemala, much less teaching a class, right? But I looked at my friend Kyle. I was like, "Oh, maybe you should take them up on that. You're here a few more months, So, but anyway, then COVID happened, and I was very content with my job and my life and everything. But I've had this podcast for a long time as well, Agents of Innovation, and I interview so many entrepreneurs that after you interview so many, you start thinking maybe I could do something entrepreneurial. Well, that's what led me to start my company, Fearless Journeys, where we help people build an entrepreneur's mindset, but also take people on some great group trips. And as I was trying to decide how I was going to leave my job, like the one with the paycheck, to go start this new company, I was like, how am I going to do this? And one thing that came to my mind was, I wonder if I could go somewhere that's less expensive to live, maybe for 6 or 9 months, and I could start this company and maybe get it off the ground and be able to start sustaining myself. And then I could go back to my normal life. That's kind of what I was thinking. And so what popped to my head next was, where would I go? And then I thought, well, what about Guatemala? I mean, I had visited my friend Kyle there just a year and a half earlier, and he was basically just living off some savings for 9 months. And I remember things here being very inexpensive, and yet it seemed like everybody was pretty happy here. And it was there was a lot of it wasn't going to be a place that was going to be difficult to adjust to live in. And so I thought, maybe I'll improve my Spanish. I just started thinking, like, what's the worst that can happen? I go back to doing something similar with my old career, but maybe I can come down here. So that's what. And then the next thought that came into my head was, I remember them telling me if I was ever interested in teaching a class there. I wonder if that could happen. Well, sure enough, they made that happen very fast when I reached out to them. And so, but I say this in that I also kept in touch with some of those people from UFM between the time I visited in May of 2019 and the time I reached back out to them in November 2020 saying, hey, could I teach a class? Right. So I had seen one or two of them at a conference somewhere in the US, and just keeping in touch, never really thinking I would ever be working there. It's just kind of my nature. I like to connect people and keep in touch with people. And I do think all those sorts of things kind of add up to helping you gain like an opportunity that maybe you never even thought you would have. And that's not the first time something like that has happened in my life, right? You meet somebody, you're doing something good, you're working hard, they observe it. You may not even know they're watching, but anyway. But I will say regarding UFM, if anyone's interested, they're happy to contact me, and I'll be happy to put them in touch with anybody at UFM. And I can't promise any opportunities here, but I would say they're a very open experimental university. I don't have I have a master's in history. Okay, I don't have any kind of degree in economics or entrepreneurship or innovation, but they knew I had enough experience in working in the public policy nonprofits, and also in all the things I've gained and learned from all the entrepreneurs that I've interacted with through my podcast and in other ways as well. That they said, hey, go ahead and construct a class to teach entrepreneurship and innovation. We'll make it an elective. So that's what I do, and I think the students find my class very interesting for a few reasons. One, it's a professor from the United States, and two, the students are very, very interested in these subjects. And I even play some clips from my podcasting class so they can kind of hear directly from an entrepreneur, like for a few minutes, like someone's experience, how it relates to
Yeah.
to the subject matter that we're talking about. So I will say this though, after teaching my first college class there, uh, I really realized that the number one student in the class was myself, and I learned a lot from the students, but I also learned a lot more about the subject. I think if you want to become a master at a subject, or at least better knowledgeable a subject, teach it, because you're gonna
It's
have to
true.
prepare those
Definitely
lessons,
true.
and you're also going to get the interaction in class with the students. And so that's been really, I really thank UFM for giving me that opportunity as well.
Very cool. And remind me, so what were you doing as like your primary career? How were you making money to live in South Florida before? Because you're involved in all these things and projects and the economic club and all this stuff, but what was your actual career?
Yeah, so the prior 15 years before I went off on starting Fearless Journeys and moving to Guatemala, I had been working at a few different public policy think tanks, and I was doing fundraising for them primarily. So the last one I was with was National Review Institute, which was a national organization, and I was based in Orlando, Florida at that time. I just so happened to be living in Orlando then, and
Mm.
I was just working remote for them. But I would travel all over the Southeast and Texas as well, to
Uh-huh.
meet with supporters, go to events, things like that. The previous 9 years, I was working for a free market think tank in the state capital of Florida. It's called the James Madison Institute, and I was living in
What's the state
Tallahassee of all places.
capital? Is it
Tallahassee,
Tallahassee? Oh,
yeah.
I thought it might be Jacksonville. Okay.
So I lived in Tallahassee for 8 years, and Tallahassee is actually a nice city, but it's like really hard to get to from everywhere. So it's a 7-hour drive from Miami. It's about a 4-hour drive from Orlando. The airport situation in Tallahassee is not great.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to convert your crypto into gift card balances. These are gift cards that you can spend at hotels.com, Airbnb, Nike, and many more. You may remember Joel Valenzuela, previous podcast guest. He's been living on crypto exclusively since 2015, and he's a big consumer of BitRefill. And so I asked Joel, I said, what do you like most about BitRefill? He said that he likes the instant delivery, the precise amounts so that you don't have to juggle a lot of gift cards, and he loves the global selection. Nobody else has this much selection of gift cards, over 10,000 gift card options across hundreds of countries. Go to bitrefill.com to sign up, and you can also use the code MyLatinLife for 10% back off your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. That's one of those classic like school questions where they try to screw the students up, right? I guess
Yeah,
I'm giving away that I might not be American by that question, but because you got to know your state capitals, right? Especially Florida.
yeah.
Question for you though. So about fundraising like that is pretty cool. What does that consist of? Being a nonprofit think tank fundraiser, like how does what? Because a lot of people don't have any kind of window into that world. If you could give us a bit of a glimpse.
Well, let me tell you this. If people are looking for a career path with a lot of opportunity, go into fundraising for any kind of nonprofit. And people think, oh, nonprofits, you're not going to make that much money. That's not necessarily the case. It depends.
Hmm.
And in fact, the thing is, so many nonprofits, including like public policy think tanks, which most of them are classified as nonprofits, 501c3s, because they're doing educational work. Um, they have a really hard time finding good development people. And so, I do tell younger people, like, this is, if you're trying to get a step into an organization, this is a great step, because really you're the business development person for the nonprofit. You are, instead of like
Yeah.
selling, products to customers, you're selling ideas or maybe a cause to a donor. So you're
And
really.
would the donors be high net worth individuals or is it corporations or?
Yeah, so we had most of our donors were individuals. We also had foundations, private
Mm,
foundations that give
right.
support to nonprofits, and we also had corporations. Although the organizations I worked for, the corporate support was probably about 10% of the overall budget. The foundations were about 40 to 50%, and the individuals were about 40 to 50%. So, um, yeah, but and the individuals, again, it generally works out this way in most nonprofits I've seen, that about 80 to 90% of your funding is coming from about 10 to 20% of your donors. So yes,
Hmm.
so you're really focused. I might have had a portfolio of say 150 donors that they were my number one focus. Like
The
I wanted to touch
whales.
base with them at least once a month, right? Yeah, those are the people that. But we had thousands of donors, and
Yeah.
those people could give $25 a year, $100 a year, you know. But once you
And,
start getting to people that give 1,000 or more a year, those are the people you start really
and what's the
focusing on.
value prop? Like a university will say, hey, we'll put your name on a building. Um, Other things will be like, hey, we'll name like a scientific organization might say, we'll name a prize after you and we'll call it the Francisco Gonzalez Prize. You know what I mean? So they kind of feel like there's a bit of a value prop there. What
Yeah,
what kind
so
of value prop were you working
yeah.
with?
So to be honest with you, this is like an interesting question because if you're coming from the for-profit sector, you're like, what's in it for these people that are just donating? I actually don't think most donors care to have their name on something. Some will actually tell you, don't put my name on something. Like they either want to remain anonymous or they just don't care. There are people that certainly care about that. And that's why things have names on them. But I think most people are truly, they want to see impact. There's something that they care deeply about. And your job as like a development officer in a sense is to match what's in their heart with what you can do to change something in the world that they care about, to impact something that they care about. So it's more difficult to quantify this with think tanks, right? Think tanks are putting out policy papers and things like that, but if you're really saying how do we shape ideas in the culture, one way to do that might be through think tanks. It's not the only way. I mean, you could do that through all sorts of other cultural uh, avenues. People do it through film and everything like that. But but yeah, I think it's just making sure to connect with the donor on why your organization is like the avenue that is going to fulfill the way they want to make an impact. And by the way, that also means that you have to listen to your donors because you might have to adapt to what your donors need. And an organization could get stuck in the status quo of
Hmm.
not moving forward because they're thinking, oh, I just need to publish a white paper every month. No, donors want to see more than that, and so um, I think that's kind of the real challenge. But I think again in that field, the one thing I found, just like everything else in life, is building relationships. And um, I know I've been doing a lot of talking, and you've been doing a lot of listening, but the skill that you're exhibiting right now, Vance, is actually the number one skill that somebody in any kind of sales job or development needs to have, and that is just to listen and let the person just talk away.
I'm also a good interrupter. No. I have a random question for you. Have you ever met Suarez, the mayor of Miami?
I have met him actually. Technically, he's spoken at some of our events at the Economic Club of Miami, but I'm usually too busy, or running around organizing, managing the events that I don't really get like with him. We had other people that would help him, but I actually, when I was with my last organization that I was with, we happened to do a, a sort of an event for our donors that was online during the COVID year. And so I got a chance to actually moderate a discussion with the Mayor
Hmm.
Suarez, like we're doing today on here.
That's awesome. Um, I noticed that your guests on your podcast, Agents of Innovation, are very eclectic. And it actually reminds me of the My Latin Life podcast because our guests are quite eclectic as well. Like one day it's a lawyer, one day it's an adventurer, that kind of thing. And with you, I see a lot of the same thing where you've had there's obviously a theme there, but they're a little bit all over the place in a good way. You've had people talk about free trade zones. You've had people in the government in Florida, a lot of different stuff. Maybe you could tell people some of your more interesting podcast guests or conversations that you've had.
Yeah, it's good. I've been, by the way, the podcast, like you've probably discovered, is at the beginning, I started it because I really was meeting so many interesting people just through the kind of work I was doing. And I would walk away from a lot of conversations just thinking, wow, I wish more people could hear that person's story. And then one day I said, hey, maybe I could start a podcast and let people hear their story. But the other thing is, as the podcast advanced, the podcast has become an avenue to be able to have conversations with people I probably otherwise wouldn't have. And
Right.
so that's been really cool. Gosh, so many people. It's hard to pick out some interesting ones. But I, on my 100th episode, uh, about a year and a half ago, I interviewed a guy who's basically real big in the
Gerard
video game
Kelly.
space. Gerard Kelly, yes, Gerard. I didn't know who he was. I literally met him. By the way, the other thing I love, Vance, is I love cigars, and so
Oh, cool.
uh, and so a friend of mine in Orlando, my friend Mark, who's in real estate. Maybe I don't know if I should be saying this publicly, but anyway, he was like, "Hey, my friend Gerard is in town, and he has some Cuban cigars that he just got." And so Mark doesn't really smoke cigars, maybe like once a year, and neither does Gerard apparently. But when Mark heard that, he said, "Hey, my friend Francisco loves cigars. Maybe we should invite him." And I think Mark just thought it would also be somebody interesting for me to meet. So I didn't know who Gerard even was. And then when I met him and I spent a few hours with him one evening, I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. And I was kind of looking for somebody really interesting to be my 100th podcast guest. And I asked him at the end of the night, hey, would you be open to a podcast? So he was great. But he was the co-founder of, gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but it's one of the top esports companies. And so
NRG.
NRG Esports. And by the way, I mentioned his name and NRG to a couple of friends of mine who are really big into that esports area, and they were like, "Oh my god, you met Gerard Kelly!" Like, and Gerard has he's met and worked with so many different people. He had some investors into, I think it was in NRG Esports, that included people like Shaquille O'Neal and J Lo and like all these people. And I was like, why do these people invest? I don't know. I didn't know much about esports. I thought esports, to be honest with you, was video games about sports. I didn't know that people actually sat around and watched other people play video games, and that
I'm
was,
still with you. I don't get it either.
yeah.
Uh,
But it's huge, and people do it. And Gerard was, his story of how he got into that space was so interesting. And he's in his like early 40s now, and he's doing stuff with AI and like people in the military, and like, man, he's just doing so many amazing things, but totally like not in the spotlight. I mean, people in his world know who he is, but most people don't. So it was really cool. So that was a great guest. More recently, I had a guy here in Antigua, Guatemala, named Philip Wilson, who took a charity that his mother and sister had started. The charity basically gave poor people in Guatemala a free eco filter. Like, basically, there's really unclean water in most areas of
okay.
Guatemala, especially in the
Yep.
poor communities. So there's actually, like, somebody invented this thing called the eco filter like many years ago, and made it like an open source for anybody to use and sell or use whatever they want. Um, so there was no like kind of copyright on it, I guess you could say, or no patent on it.
Mm.
And so you know, Philip had done really well in life before he hit 40 years old. He basically was like retired, and he came from a pretty well-off background here in Guatemala. And he told me when I met him, like, and he was giving me the tour of this company, EcoFilter, but EcoFiltro, that he just woke up one day and he was like, I don't know, 40 years old or something, 40 something. Like he felt like he had made it, but he had no purpose left. And so he starts looking around for something to do. And his sister had this charity, and but Philip has this like entrepreneur mindset, and so he starts helping his sister with the charity. And then he says, "Can I go out and visit some of the families?" Because he was trying to figure out, how can we scale this? We're only giving this to 2,000 families a year. Like, there's millions of families that probably need this. So how can we
Mhm.
scale this? And he realized we're very limited if this remains a charity. as after I just talked very positively a few minutes ago about nonprofits and stuff. One thing Philip discovered was he thought he could scale this through a charity. I mean, through a for profit company. And when you go to your sister who's running a charity out of the goodness of her heart, and you tell her you want to turn this into a for profit company, she thinks you're like an evil capitalist, right? So, well, it turns out that was the best idea they could have ever done. And so I say go back and listen to that episode because it's so interesting. But they now serve they have now gotten that EcoFiltro. They've turned it into a private company called EcoFiltro, and now they make 2,000 of those things a week. Those filters, and they sell them. They sell them, and so they sell them to poor people and they sell them to rich people. But the thing is, when you were just giving something away, the people didn't place any value in it. And so he showed how actually when you put uh, something when you put something of value that people actually have to put a little stake in, they actually value the product a lot more and will actually want to use it. And that's good because they need to drink clean water and not drink nasty, dirty water. So that Philip's, I think, one of the most incredible entrepreneur minds I've had on the podcast, and he's from right here in Antigua, Guatemala. But yeah, lots of interesting people. I mean, like you said, I've
What
had
percentage of your guests? Sorry to interrupt. What percentage of your guests do you think have come from Guatemala?
So my first 100 episodes were pretty much all in the U.S., with the exception of a Canadian and an Israeli guy and a Bermuda guy. That's it.
Okay.
The rest were, I think, all
Okay.
from the U.S.
And now,
Episodes 101 through 110, I had all in Guatemala, and then I've had like another 4. So I think probably like 14 or 15 have
14,
come from
15.
Guatemala.
We had a little series. I downloaded one that I want to listen to now, which is with the cigar company guy,
Which one?
Cigar Lounge,
In
Alex
Guatemala?
Mitron.
Yes, Alex is great. By the way, for anybody that smokes cigars, I mean, I'm just going to say I meet so many people through cigars, including sometimes the cigar lounge owners. And Alex has, really the best cigar lounge in Guatemala City, and that is um, the Caranto Club.
Mhm.
And Alex is just an interesting guy. He's a lawyer by background. I think he's about 50 years old now. He's got 2 small kids. Uh, and about in 2012, he became the Guatemala's ambassador to the Dominican Republic. And I had him on the podcast like about a year after I've met him. I mean, after hearing, you're sitting around having cigars and you talk so many stories over the years. I was like, man, I got to have you on my podcast. Um, and I didn't even realize it till we were like, I think right before we did the podcast, I said, by the way, when you went to the Dominican Republic in 2012, you already were into cigars, right? And he said, no, I had never smoked a cigar in my life. He was like an athlete, like a triathlon guy, and like, I mean, he has swam Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. Like, he's a big time lifelong athlete. He always thought smoking was bad, and then when he was in Dominican Republic, he had some friends there that introduced him to cigars. He got so into it, by the time he left being ambassador to the Dominican Republic, came back to Guatemala, he started his own cigar brand and his own cigar lounge. But he's got
That's
a
cool.
lot of great experiences.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Quick break from the podcast to tell you about Language Blend, the best new way to learn Spanish. Language Blend was co-founded by Jake Nomada, friend of the podcast, decade of experience in Latin America. And Jake and his team, they put everything into this program that they wish they had in terms of how to level up quickly with your Spanish language skills. Because the faster that you can get conversationally fluent in Spanish, the better the experience that you're going to have in Latin America. So go to languageblend.com for more information. Yeah, I'm in a region of Mexico where they actually grow cigars here, and they're very not well known. A lot of people don't know that Mexico makes cigars. And since it's so unknown, I thought there might be some opportunity there. So I've always been very interested in the idea of, coffee farms and cigars and agriculture in Latin America. I haven't gone too far in this direction yet. Part of me knows it's a horrible idea, but I'm so cool and I think it's so cool and passionate about it. So these are episodes that would be of particular interest to me. You've had some people with coffee farms on the podcast. You've had a couple cigar episodes. I think that's cool.
Yeah, honestly, one of the greatest stories is the guy that started that coffee farm in Guatemala. I think it's maybe around episode 108 or something like that, and that was Beto Reyes, and they now have the 14th. Their coffee ranks 14th in Guatemala's Cup of Excellence. And by the way, Guatemala has exceptional coffee, so to be on that level is amazing. The guy Beto Reyes, he's probably in his mid 50s or so, mid to late 50s. Um, when he grew up in poverty in Guatemala, and when you go to, if you were to just step into this coffee farm, that's like a couple hundred acres of land, at least on the side of a mountain in a city called Palencia, about an
Mhm.
hour outside Guatemala City, on the away, not on the same side as Antigua, the other direction. You would not believe that I had brought my first group that I brought to the coffee farm. They opened up their doors for my groups, even though they don't really do tours. But I got to know one of his sons, and his son said, "Sure, we'll have Fearless Journeys come and do a tour." And now we've done 3 different tours there. And one
Coffee
of my
farm
friends who
tours with Fearless Journeys.
Yeah, and one of my friends came, and after he went through the whole 2 or 3 hour tour of this coffee farm, I mean, riding around on mountain roads. I call it the coffee safari because I put a couple people in the back of a pickup truck, and it's like, yeah, it's like you feel like you're at like on a
I like
safari, and
that.
just like coffee trees everywhere, and it's just so cool. But you wouldn't expect this, but anyway, then you get to the house, and Saul, the middle son, then shows us a wall to start to tell us the family story. Well, his father grew up in poverty. His father grew up with no shoes. Didn't even wear shoes. That's how poor he was. You would not think that this family, a family that owns a coffee farm like that in Guatemala, you would think has been in some kind of wealth for generations, because that kind of mobility doesn't happen as fast here for most people.
Right.
But this guy has an incredible story, Beto Reyes. And anyway, on the wall in that living room, the son showed us there's a case on the wall with his father's carpentry tools. When his father was 18 years old, the guy that owns this coffee farm, when he was 18 years old, he was making $1 a day in Guatemala doing carpentry work for different businesses. And advanced now, they've had this coffee farm for 26 years. And the father is also the mayor of the town, Palencia. He's been mayor now for 12 years, and the people love him. And I had an amazing opportunity to be on that. I've been on that coffee farm about 5 or 6 times now,
Mm.
3 different tours, but I got to interview Beto Reyes, the father and the mayor of Palencia, Guatemala. So I think that's a really cool episode. And it also will show you, when you watch all these episodes in Guatemala, we do the interviews in English. And all of these guests speak fluent English. A couple have pretty strong accents, but other than that, their English was much better than my Spanish to be, and also for my
Mm.
listeners to be able to do the things in English. So I think that really, somebody once told me, they asked me, what is the difference? Or so sorry, they said, what do you call somebody who's bilingual, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who speaks 2 languages, right? Sorry, what do you call somebody who speaks 2 languages, right? Bilingual, right? What do you call somebody that speaks one language?
American.
American, yes. So, look, I'm in that category. I'm not fluent in Spanish yet. I'm getting there. But I do think, if you do hit on this a lot, so does Jers, so does James Nuveen. I think if you want to improve your economic opportunities, but also if you just want to be a more well-cultured person and be able to travel to different parts of the world and connect with people on another level, learn at least a second language, if not more, and you'll be able to really connect with a lot more people and understand other cultures a lot better. And I think what's amazing about the people here in Guatemala that I've met and been able to meet with, been able to get to know, is how much they have done to further their education, and I think in one way, being fluent in English as well, because they understand that English as well is the path forward, especially for a lot of people from Latin America to be able to engage in business around the world and with other people. So
Definitely. Tell us a bit about the Fearless Journeys trips that you do.
yeah, so these are fun trips. So what you probably just heard there, what I do is, I don't consider Fearless Journeys a tour company. I consider it a community of people who really are interested in building an entrepreneur mindset and also connecting with innovators across the world. So I have done my best to chart the course in a lot of different communities and countries and cities to meet and connect with so many people so that I can bring people. And as soon as you step off the plane in Guatemala, you're going to have friends across this country by the end of the week, and also pretty well connected friends. And and you're probably going to try to do business if you're trying to make some business connections too. You'll have that opportunity as well. But the biggest thing is that you'll make some really great connections. And so we've done in addition to taking people to some of the great landmarks and doing some fun things that you might do on a typical vacation or tour. We really try to connect you with those local entrepreneurs and innovators. Some of the people I mentioned here. So you get to go to the coffee when we do the Guatemala trip. You go to the coffee farm. You meet the mayor. You sit around and have lunch with the family at the end of the
It's pretty
tour.
cool. It is pretty cool.
Uh, One of the coolest things for me is on my third group trip of coming here to Guatemala. Uh, we do like the first 2 days we're in Guatemala City. Then we venture out to Palencia and we do the coffee farm tour. And the group gets to see the whole tour, and then they get to sit down and have lunch with the family. And I can tell you, one of my travelers, I mean, right when lunch was ending and we're starting to walk away from the house, he just says out loud, gosh, people got to get out of the United States. People got to get off their couch. We are being lied
Agreed.
to. Like,
Agreed.
I mean, whether you watch CNN or whatever other channel you watch to, I mean, they are just not telling you the truth about the rest of the world. You've got to go see it for yourself.
Can I pause? We'll come back to the tours kind of as we do the outro, and you can shout out the tours again. But why are Americans being lied to? I think this is an interesting topic as an American that's now getting his eyes open to Guatemala and Latin America. How are Americans? How do they have misconceptions about Latin America?
I think there's a few misconceptions, but I think for the most part, and I'm going to actually come to this back to this word fear, which it wasn't really my intent with starting Fearless Journeys, but the media runs more people. They drive fear because when you drive fear, more people will watch you. So whether you're afraid of X candidate running for president, whether you're afraid of immigrants coming across the border, whether you're afraid of you know terrorism in the Middle East, whatever it is, like the fear drives the narrative that gets more people to watch.
Hmm.
And so I think it's a lot driven on fear. I'm not necessarily saying that people in the media do it intentionally. They may or may not. But I think that's what gets more people to watch things. And then so that's one. I think the media is a big problem. The good news is we have things like X and other things today where you could follow My Latin Life and you could see somebody who's actually there, who's reporting on the ground, maybe not as a reporter, but you are a media source in some ways, right? I mean, you got a
Yeah.
podcast, you got a Twitter account. So you can see real life people. You got Francisco with Fearless Journeys. You got James Nuveen in Medellin, right? All these people that are like, hey, we're actually this is actually a pretty great life and a pretty great place to visit. So don't be afraid to come here. The other thing is, I had to, I hate to say this, but I think the U.S. State Department's a real problem as well. And when I
Why's
first
that?
got to Guatemala and I was living here and I was 6, 8 weeks in, I had friends that were starting to contact me. They wanted to just come visit. And then I had two friends in the same week that didn't know each other that called me and said, hey, Francisco, I was thinking about coming, but I went to the State Department's website to look at, what it says about Guatemala. And, did you know that Guatemala is a zone 4 dangerous country? That's what it was at the time. It might be like, or zone 4, whatever it's called. Level 4 dangerous country. I said, what the hell does that even mean? And then I went to the State Department's website. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm going to the grocery store every day. I'm walking down the street. I'm doing, I mean, does danger exist maybe in some parts of Guatemala City? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it does. But I didn't, here's what I thought. And I love the United States. I love my country. But I thought, if the State Department's going to apply these standards to, say, a Guatemala or whatever other country,
Hmm.
I wonder if they would what levels they would rate the cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and Detroit, and shoot, Washington, D.C., maybe some parts, Baltimore, Atlanta. I mean, just if you go through, like, where would they fall compared to Guatemala City or Mexico City or all these other places, when there's rampant violence all the time in U.S. cities? And so I think that combined with, hey, maybe I'm a traveler and I'm interested in going to Guatemala, and then I go on the U.S. State Department website and I go, oh, hell no, I'm not going there. Right now, after seeing that, I actually don't even know what to trust, because I do think that there are well-intentioned people at the State Department that are trying to keep Americans safe. That's kind of their job, right, around the world, and keep them out of harm's way and things like that. But I think they overdo it, and they're really selling us a lie about the rest of the world. And by the way, I mean, I talked to people here in Guatemala about that. I mean, pretty high level people, like in business and education and things like that. And I asked them, why do you think this is? Because I feel like it just gives Guatemala a bad rap, and like maybe if more people came here, like less migrants would leave here because there'd be a better economy. Um, and they said, they have no incentive to say that it's a better place. When the State Department officials say in Guatemala, um, put together the reports on Guatemala, if they say it's more dangerous, they're going to get more funding from the State Department and from the government, right? They're not. So they're not saying that they do it for that reason, but they have no incentive not to. And I was scratching my head one day after being here about a year, and I thought, wait, these people that work at the State Department in Guatemala are living in the same city I'm living in. I know they're enjoying restaurants here. I know they're enjoying their time here, just like anybody else would. How can they possibly put together a report that says what the State Department's website says about Guatemala, and think that's the truth? It's clearly not. So it really baffles me. And I don't want to get into politics, but Guatemala is about to go through a really tense political situation in the next month or two, with a contested election here. So I hope things work out here on that front for them, because it's, to me, before that even happened, I really saw this as a country on the rise and almost a little hidden secret in some ways. I mean, the people that know Guatemala, it's no secret. They come here a lot. They love it. Mm-hmm. I've had about 45, 50 people that have come to Guatemala on one of my trips, or even just visiting me as a friend in the last 2 years. And I think with the exception of 2 people, none of them had ever been here before. And all of them, before they even leave, they're just like in love with Guatemala. And so when I see that, and I think, well, there's some distance here between what we're being shown on the media or what we're being led to believe from our government or whatever. Now I will say, when you see the border crossings and you see a lot of migrants coming from Central America, it might be easy conclusion to say to yourself, well, if these people are leaving these countries, they must be bad, right? I think the challenge in a lot of these, especially Central American countries, is there's plenty of people here doing well, but there's definitely many people not. There's many people living in extreme poverty. And if they can't, unlike the United States, there's not a lot of upward mobility for a lot of people, not as much. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, there's a lot of reasons for that. We could have a whole podcast on that. But I think so they see this great opportunity to the north. They have family that might be there. They have connections, and they're going to do everything they can because their situation is so desperate. So my hope that whether it's U.S. policy from a government policy point of view, or whether it's a media narrative that needs to change, I hope that more Americans and the U.S. government, can maybe put more investment in helping the people that are in the dire situations here in Central America, because this area is literally on the precipice of being a really great investment, and a really great place that can thrive on its own without the need of people from the outside. There's so much. Guatemala is abundant in resources. I mean, mm-hmm. there's an American here. You should actually. This is a great episode 101 of the Agents of Innovation podcast. Jake Denberg. Jake might be a good one for you, by the way. He moved here in 1983 as a young chef. And he's got a great restaurant that's been in Guatemala City for like 30-something years called Jake's Restaurant. But I had him come speak to my students in one of my classes at Francisco Marroquin University. And Jake told my students Guatemala is the most what do you say? It's the wealthiest country I've ever lived in my life. And I looked at him like, what is he talking about? Well, what he really meant by that was it's so abundant with resources. He's like, look at all the places in Africa that they can't grow like crops. Like they have nothing. They have no rain. They're in deserts. They've destroyed things in a lot of places. Guatemala, he said, you could drop a seed on the ground and things just grow. And he's right. And so I think there's a lot of abundant resources here, and so if they could just kind of get it together a little bit, I think it's a place that can really be really, really prosperous.
I agree.
Not to
And
mention the tourism.
definitely one of the least mentioned countries in Latin America in my experience in terms of interest levels in our community, in Twitter discussions, in our Telegram groups, all that. Guatemala is one of, if not the least mentioned. It's crazy, even though it's right on our doorstep, and it's a pretty big country. Um, but thank you for this, Francisco, because I think this was probably our first Guatemala focused episode, if I'm thinking about it. So good to hear about an American that's down there thriving and getting involved with the country in different ways. Really interesting. And maybe just take this time, Francisco, to tell people if they want to do a tour with you. I know you have one coming up in Argentina, I believe. And yeah, just whatever message you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, so we got a tour in April in Argentina. It's a 3-parter. People could choose 1, 2, or all 3 parts. We're going to Buenos Aires, Mendoza, 4 days in the wine country. Lots of great wine tours, and then also to Bariloche in the Patagonia country. So that's in April. I think ranging between about April 9th through the 22nd. So the best way to connect on all of that is go to fearlessjourneys.org. Fearlessjourneys.org. You could also follow me on Instagram. I'm Fearless Journeys FG. Twitter, F Gonzalez 1978, all those sorts of things. So yeah. Anyway, but it's that's probably the best thing. Just go to fearlessjourneys.org to kind of start the journey with us.
Sick, man. I'm gonna need a promo code or something. Promo My Latin Life.
Okay, we'll do that. Give me some time to set that up. Probably by the time you launch this, I'll do a My Latin Life, maybe a 10% discount on the next trip.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, Francisco, thanks again for joining us. Really interesting to hear your story, and really excited for this next chapter for you. Again, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. My guest today, Francisco Gonzalez. Go check out his podcast. Tell us the name one more time.
Oh yeah, no, my podcast is Agents of Innovation. So if you just Google Agents of Innovation podcast, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the places.
Good stuff. Thanks again.
Thank you, Vance.